Chapter 1, Dawn of War, September 1st, 1939. Gdansk, Poland, 4:45 a.m., September 1st, 1939. A still, gray morning. The Baltic Sea lay calm, as if unaware of the world-shaking violence that was seconds away. Inside the harbor, the German battleship Schleswig-Holstein sat silently. It had arrived under the pretext of a ceremonial visit. In reality, its guns were already aimed. The order came without warning. A deafening blast split the sky as the ship fired the first shells of World War II. The target was the Polish military depot at Westerplatte, a small peninsula defended by barely 200 soldiers' men who suddenly found themselves face to face with the full power of the German Navy. The Polish guards had no idea the first shots of a global war were about to land on them. The Blitz begins. Within minutes, the sky over northern Poland filled with the drone of engines. Hundreds of Luftwaffe bombers crossed the border in tight formation, their wings flashing in the morning light. They headed for railways, airfields, towns, and communication centers. This wasn't random bombing. It was a calculated strike meant to paralyze Poland before it could even react. Cities like Wielin, Chieł, Kraków, and Warsaw were hit in the opening hours. Hospitals, roads, and civilian districts were not spared. The idea was simple and brutal. Destroy Poland's ability to respond, break its morale, break its spine. In the air, Polish pilots scrambled to take off while their runways were literally exploding beneath them. Despite being outnumbered and flying outdated aircraft, they scored early victories, proof of their skill and determination, but the odds were overwhelming. The armored spearhead, at the same time, across a 1,000-kilometer border, German ground forces advanced in 3 enormous thrusts. These weren't the slow, grinding infantry units of the First World War. These were combined armed spearheads made of tanks, motorized infantry, engineers, and close air support, the first true demonstration of blitzkrieg tactics on a national scale. From East Prussia, from Silesia, and from Pomerania, armored divisions rolled forward like moving fortresses. The Panzer I and II tanks, though lightly armed, were fast and coordinated. Radios in every vehicle allowed constant communication, something the Polish army lacked. Roads became clogged with civilians fleeing the border areas, unknowingly making it harder for Polish troops to reach defensive positions. Confusion spread. Rumors flew, and the German advance moved faster than the Polish high command could track. Poland fights back. Despite the surprise and chaos, Polish resistance was fierce. At Westerplatte, the defenders stunned the Germans by holding out not for hours, but for 7 days, repelling repeated assaults and withstanding constant bombardment. Across the country, cavalry brigades, often misunderstood, in popular history fought as mobile infantry, launching counterattacks, delaying German armor, and disrupting supply lines. Their bravery became a symbol of Poland's determination. In the Central Corridor, the German advance toward Warsaw met stronger resistance than expected. Villages fought house to house. Bridges were blown at the last moment. Armored columns found themselves temporarily trapped in narrow roads or ambushed by concealed anti-tank units. But valor could not overcome the imbalance in technology, coordination, and numbers. Poland's main defensive plan needed time, and time was the one thing Germany refused to allow. The world reacts. News of the invasion spread across Europe like lightning. In London, Neville Chamberlain addressed the House of Commons with grim resignation. Diplomats confirmed that Germany had crossed the border in multiple locations. Britain delivered an ultimatum: withdraw or face war. Berlin ignored it. In Paris, French ministers debated mobilization. The public remembered the horrors of 1914 and feared another catastrophe. But the treaty obligations were clear. If France did nothing, its alliances would become meaningless. Meanwhile, Roosevelt and Washington issued a statement condemning the attack, but reaffirmed American neutrality. The U.S. would watch closely, but it would not enter the conflict. The world had changed in a single morning, and everyone felt it. The road to Warsaw. By nightfall on September 1st, the Polish defensive line was fractured but not broken. German commanders expected a quick victory, but they underestimated the resolve of the Polish army and the complexity of the terrain. Polish commanders attempted to form a coherent line along the Vistula and San rivers, hoping to slow the advance and buy time for Allies to intervene. But they already suspected the terrible possibility. What if no one came? What if Poland was to stand alone? Germany pushed forward relentlessly. Tanks bypassed pockets of resistance, leaving infantry to deal with them. The Luftwaffe maintained control of the skies, and every hour the Polish situation became more desperate. But the story was far from over. Warsaw still stood. The Polish army still fought, and the world was about to take the next step toward total war. London, September 2, 1939. Inside the cabinet room at 10 Downing Street, the air felt thick enough to choke. Ministers sat in tense silence as Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain read Germany a response to Britain's ultimatum. There was no apology, no retreat, no negotiation. Only a blunt statement. Germany would not stop the invasion. Across the Channel, France's government faced the same grim reality. Their diplomats, too, had been ignored. Europe's fragile diplomatic system, already wounded by Munich and broken by the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, was collapsing before their eyes. Britain's moment of decision. Chamberlain was a man who had spent years trying to avoid war. He believed in treaties, signatures, diplomacy. But now his voice trembled as he admitted what everyone already knew. Germany intended to conquer Poland, and if Britain failed to act, its word would mean nothing ever again. On the morning of September 3rd, the British cabinet convened for one final vote. Every minister present, even the most cautious, accepted the inevitable. At 9:00 a.m., Britain issued a final, clear ultimatum: withdraw from Poland immediately, or Britain would be at war. No answer came. At 11:15 a.m., Chamberlain spoke on the radio to a stunned nation. This country is at war with Germany. Millions of listeners held their breath. For the first time since World War I, Britain was entering a European conflict. Church bells did not ring, people did not cheer. There was no celebration, only dread. France joins the fight in Paris. The French government faced its own paralysis. Memories of the trenches were still raw. A new war felt unthinkable. Yet France had promised to defend Poland for years. On September 3rd, after hours of internal argument, France followed Britain's lead and issued an ultimatum of its own. Berlin ignored it. And so, at 5:00 p.m., France declared war on Germany. Crowds gathered silently along the boulevards, listening to the announcement as if it were a funeral. Veterans from 1918 stared ahead with hollow eyes. Everyone knew what this meant. Europe was officially at war again. But what about Poland? Despite their guarantees, Britain and France were not ready to launch an offensive. Their armies were mobilizing, but slowly, cautiously. The French commanders debated strategy obsessively. Some argued for an immediate strike into the Saar region, where German defenses were thin. Others insisted on waiting for full mobilization. The result was a compromise that satisfied no one. A limited, symbolic advance that halted almost immediately. While Polish cities burned, while tanks approached Warsaw, the Western Allies remained mostly passive, hoping the threat of a two-front war would force Hitler to retreat. He didn't retreat. He accelerated. Public reactions: shock, anger, and uncertainty. In Britain, newspapers screamed, "Poland in flames. Where is the French army? Will Allies move to save Warsaw?" Citizens prepared for air raids that never came, at least not yet. Evacuations of children began across major cities. Gas masks were distributed. People dug shelters in their back gardens, rehearsing for the nightmare everyone expected: massive aerial bombing of London. In France, the mobilization was huge. Men in uniform flooded railway stations, heading to the German border. But morale was fragile. Many quietly wondered if this war would be worse than the last. Hitler's reaction. In Berlin, the Führer expected Britain and France to protest, maybe even posture militarily. But he did not expect them to declare war. According to his adjutant's diary, Hitler stared at the declaration papers in silence for several minutes before muttering, "If only they had kept out, everything would have been perfect." He had expected Poland to crumble before the Allies intervened. He had not planned for war with the two strongest Western nations in 1939. But by the time London and Paris mobilized, the German military was already deep inside Poland. Hitler calculated correctly that Britain and France would not launch a major offensive quickly enough to save it. The phony war begins. Despite the declarations, the Western Front remained eerily quiet. For civilians in London and Paris, this silence was confusing, frightening even. Why wasn't Germany bombing? Why weren't the Allied armies advancing? Why was Poland fighting alone? Newspapers began to call it the phony war, or in France, la drôle de guerre, the strange war. But on the other side of Europe, there was nothing strange about it. There, the war was real: burning cities, shattered streets, and entire divisions already destroyed. And as British and French mobilization dragged on, a grim truth settled over Warsaw: the Allies would not arrive in time. Warsaw, first week of September 1939. Smoke curled above rooftops as the city braced for the next wave of German air raids. Sirens wailed through the streets, echoing off apartment blocks, churches, and bridges. Families rushed underground into cellars while anti-aircraft crews scrambled to rearm their guns. Outside the capital, highways and dirt roads were jammed with civilians fleeing the front lines, carts loaded with bedding, bicycles carrying entire families, livestock wandering frightened between abandoned vehicles. It was a country suddenly thrown into chaos. Yet in the midst of this panic, the Polish army still fought with fierce discipline and determination. The corridors collapsed. German armored forces pushed hard toward the Vistula River, aiming to cut off Polish units retreating from the western regions. Town after town fell under overwhelming pressure. The Polish Pomorze and Poznan armies were forced south and east, attempting to regroup. German tactics were brutally effective. Stuka dive bombers isolated units by destroying bridges. Fast-moving tank battalions bypassed strongpoints. Infantry divisions followed to clean up resistance. Polish soldiers often found themselves outflanked not because they lacked bravery, but because German communication and coordination were simply faster. Still, they carried out fighting withdrawals skillfully, refusing to collapse into disorganized retreat. The battle for the Bzura River. By mid-September, Poland launched its largest counteroffensive of the campaign, an operation that stunned German commanders. Generals Kutrzeba and Bortnowski, realizing their armies were becoming encircled, struck westward at German forces near the Bzura River. The attack was sharp, sudden, and initially successful. Polish infantry pushed German lines back several kilometers. Cavalry units charged through gaps, overrunning supply depots and disrupting communications. For the first time, German units were thrown into confusion. Hitler, alarmed, demanded immediate reinforcement. Luftwaffe wings were redirected to crush the Polish assault from the air. Within days, Stuka bombers were blanketing the area, destroying bridges and pinning Polish units under relentless attack. The counteroffensive was eventually forced back not by lack of skill, but by overwhelming firepower. Yet this battle bought Warsaw time. It delayed the encirclement. It showed the world Poland was far from passive. Warsaw under siege German forces closed in around the capital, but the city refused to surrender. Barricades went up in the streets. Volunteers, students, teachers, musicians, priests joined the defense. Firefighters raced to extinguish burning districts after each bombing raid. Polish anti-aircraft units achieved remarkable successes despite limited ammunition, bringing down dozens of German aircraft in the first days alone. Inside command bunkers, Polish leaders debated evacuation, but ultimately decided to stay. Warsaw would not abandon its people. The Eastern Front collapses. Poland's defense plan relied on falling back toward the Romanian bridgehead, a southeastern region where the army could continue fighting and potentially receive Allied support. But on September 17, 1939, everything changed. The Soviet Union invaded from the east, claiming it was protecting the populations of eastern Poland. In reality, it was acting on the secret terms of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Polish units already engaged with Germany now found themselves attacked from behind. The situation became impossible. Two totalitarian powers closing in, no Allied relief, no safe retreat, no way to reorganize defenses. Polish High Command ordered units not to engage Soviet forces unless attacked, hoping to preserve lives. But the Red Army advanced rapidly regardless. The final stand, with both Germany and the USSR converging on major cities, the Polish Army-SS remaining formations were forced south. At Lwów, Kok, and in the forests near Tomaszów, Lubelski, desperate battles were fought against overwhelming odds. Soldiers refused to surrender until ammunition was nearly gone. The last major Polish force under General Franciszek Kleberg held out until October 5th, long after Warsaw fell. They weren't defeated through lack of courage. They were defeated by the impossible, a two-front invasion with no strategic depth and no Allied intervention. The cost and the legacy. By the end of the campaign, Poland had been carved up exactly as Hitler and Stalin agreed. But the country's defense shocked the world. German commanders had predicted victory in under 10 days. It took 5 weeks of continuous resistance. Polish pilots escaped to Britain. Polish intelligence officers brought with them critical knowledge, including early work on German Enigma codes. The Polish government went into exile and would continue the fight abroad. Poland had fallen, but it had not broken. The war was now global in scale, and the next phase would unfold in skies over Europe, seas, across the Atlantic, and deserts in North Africa. But it all began here, in September 1939, with a country that refused to surrender quietly.